So Curvature's recently been selected, and I'm going to have to read this through because it's quite long, but as an Intel Data Center Solutions Premier Support Partner. So can you tell us a little bit about what that actually means?
Yeah, so essentially, Curvature has been working with Intel to provide an alternative mechanism for us to support their basically their Intel server platforms. And the idea is it helps their channel. So it's also a direct engagement with their channel partners, predominantly their distribution partners, to leverage Curvature's global capability to provide service to the Intel server platforms in the data centers. So if you took an example of, let's say, a distributor who was to sell some Intel service to a large corporate, one of the challenges they had was they needed to rely on different service providers to provide support if you're talking about a global rollout. The beauty about partnering with Curvature and Intel with the distributor is that they could have one provider that could provide them global support. So leveraging what Curvature does day in and day out, which is helping very large enterprise corporates essentially sustain their technology. This is essentially what we're doing with Intel.
Okay, and I know these things aren't handed out lightly, so
no.
what sort of processes did you, what was the selection, or, what qualifications did you have to undertake before, you were awarded this?
Yeah. So this is quite an interesting situation, because we initially did some work with a distributor in Australia. That's how this started. And of course, Intel were very, very interested in what we were doing with the distributor in Australia. And through the process of helping the distributor in Australia, they then decided to really do a deep dive technical evaluation of Curvature to see if Curvature could actually deliver globally. And then part of that process that we went through was also for our team to get really, really engaged with the Intel team, particularly on certain products, which are their high-moving products, to make sure that we had what we call third-level capability, which is essentially to get really deep with the customers. So probably the best way to describe this is if you look at how we deliver the service. So the service is divided into really three core components. The first component is obviously field engineer going on site and helping to swap out a spare part. The second piece of that is having this third-tiered support, which is to allow you to go quite deep technically to assist the customer through the triage aspects when you have those very difficult situations. So there was a lot of work before we got the accreditation to get that under control. And then there's the third and final piece, which is the logistics piece, which is making sure the part is there. And this is what's interesting, Phil, is the way in which the deal's been put together is everybody's a winner. Intel's a winner because we're helping give them classic, good service. Curvature's a winner because we're obviously going to get more business, which is what we like to do in the space of providing maintenance. But the distributor also wins because the way it works is we acquire the spares from the distributor. So the distributor wins, Intel win, and Curvature win. And you know what they say about a deal, right? Is the deal's a good deal if it's good for everybody. And this is why the deal was good. So I know it's a long way to answer your question, but you've got to understand the dynamics. It's a very well thought out program that Intel have brought to bear. And at the end, it's going to benefit everybody. Ultimately, of course, the customer, because the customer will also have, if you like, some real high-end enterprise support around break fix.
And you've given us some great insight there into what you had to do. So I guess if we're looking at the end user, what aspects do they need to consider, when they're looking at third-party maintenance? Clearly, sometimes it might arrive, with the product or via a distributor, whatever. But if they're looking, at that sort of third-party maintenance offering, whether it's for servers or more generally IT infrastructure? What are the sort of things that they should be considering?
So I think there's three really key aspects that are important that a corporate should evaluate when looking at a maintenance provider. The first thing is the capability. What is the capability of that customer? And the way I look at that capability is it's about saying, you know, how much of this device have you got under support and where? Because that's what's important, right? So one of the key things, again, going back to the Intel thing to try and describe that, you know, Curvature just in EMEA has over 5,000-6,000 servers under support of that x86 category. And these servers that we have support, essentially we are providing not only the field and the guy on site, but it's the second piece that's also important, which is the stock availability. There's no good in having an engineer arrive on site to fix something and he doesn't have a spare part. So the second part is really about the logistics element and having that availability of the spare. But there's another piece that comes into this availability of the spare that's important, which is you can have spares sitting in your FSL, but how do you know whether they're good or bad? So it's also about having not only the logistics capability, but having this ability to test the spares regularly. So when the spare does arrive on site, it's actually going to work. So you can imagine a power supply, a server in a power supply fails, you get the power supply out to the customer, the field engineer arrives on site, it's all perfectly timed, he plugs in the power supply and it doesn't work. You've still failed. So it's about making sure the spares and that logistics is there, but also that the spares are being tested and that they can work. And then there's the third piece, which is, you know, I know IT just generally is not straightforward. And you can have lots of elements that cause particular malfunctions. And it's important that you have this third tier, so above the call center, above the field engineer, who are really technically acutely aware of essentially how to deal with problems that are out of the ordinary. So not just the power supply problem, maybe fans keep on failing and why they're failing, and try and get that, you know, understanding. So it's those three elements that I would say that corporate should look at. And within that, there's probably one thing, which is really making sure that they are data center specific. Because I think what you're seeing in the markets is there are different players that are emerging, and they're almost segmenting themselves into different segments. And clearly where Curvature is playing is in the data center.